The night Declan Mercer learned to dance without his legs, the air raid sirens were singing their death song over London, and Freya Winters was humming Chopin in the rubble of what used to be her music room. You can almost smell the dust, brick, and mortar ground fine as flour, mingling with the copper tang of blood and the sweet rot of roses crushed beneath fallen beams. The Blitz had been raging for 3 months now, turning the city into a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered dreams. But in the basement of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where the wounded soldiers lay in neat rows like broken dolls, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Declan gripped the wheels of his chair, knuckles white as winter bone. The phantom pain in his missing legs screamed louder than the sirens above, but he'd learned to swallow that particular agony. What he couldn't stomach was the pity in their eyes, the nurses who spoke too softly, the doctors who looked everywhere. But at the empty space where his knees should be, the other patients who counted their blessings when they saw him roll past. "You're staring at the ceiling again," came a voice like honey poured over gravel. He turned to find a woman in a smoke-stained dress, her auburn hair escaping its pins and copper spirals. She carried a violin case in one hand and wore the kind of smile that suggested she'd seen hell and decided to redecorate it. This was Freya Winters, though he didn't know her name yet. Didn't know she'd lost her entire family in the bombing of Coventry. Didn't know she played violin for dying soldiers because music was the only language left that made sense. The ceilings. Safer than most places to look, Declan said, his voice rough from disuse. She set down her violin case and pulled up a chair, not across from him, but beside him, at his level. "I find people more interesting than plaster. People disappoint. So does plaster, eventually." She gestured to the water-stained ceiling tiles. "See that brown spot? Shaped like a butterfly? I've been watching it grow for weeks. Started as a moth, really. War changes everything." Despite himself, Declan found his gaze drawn to her hands. Long fingers, calloused from violin strings, moving as she spoke like birds taking flight. When she laughed, a sound like silver bells and morning frost. Something inside his chest unclenched for the first time since the landmine had claimed his legs in France. "You're the new patient from the 42nd Infantry," she said. It wasn't a question. What gave it away? The stunning good looks or the charming personality? The way you hold your shoulders, like you're still carrying a rifle. She studied him with eyes the color of storm clouds. "I'm Freya. I play music for the wounded. Sometimes I play for the dying, but I try not to tell them which category they're in. Cheerful work. Someone has to tend the roses while the world burns." She opened her violin case, revealing an instrument that had seen better decades. "What would you like to hear? I know everything from Bach to the latest dance hall numbers. I don't dance anymore. Neither do I. Lost my partner in the bombing. But that doesn't mean the music stops." The sirens above grew louder, and the hospital lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, anti-aircraft guns began their rhythmic thunder. Freya lifted her violin to her chin, closed her eyes, and began to play. The melody was Chopin's Waltz in A-flat major, but she played it like a lament, slow, achingly beautiful, full of pauses that spoke louder than notes. In the basement hospital, surrounded by the wounded and dying, her music transformed the space into something sacred. You could almost believe, listening to her play, that broken things could be made whole again. Declan watched her fingers dance across the strings, watched the way her body swayed with the music, watched how the other patients grew quiet and still. A man with bandaged eyes began to weep. A nurse hummed along under her breath. Even the doctor making his rounds stopped to listen. "You play like you're trying to resurrect the dead," Declan said when she finished. "Sometimes I am." She lowered her violin. "Sometimes I'm trying to remind the living why they should keep breathing." "And which am I?" Before she could answer, the lights cut out entirely. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the building shuddered as something exploded close by. Too close. Plaster rained from the ceiling like snow, and someone screamed. "Direct hit on the east wing," a nurse shouted. "We need to evacuate the basement." Panic rippled through the ward. Patients who could walk began stumbling toward the exits. Those who couldn't looked around with the wild eyes of trapped animals. Freya's violin case snapped shut with a sound like breaking bones. "Can you move quickly?" she asked Declan, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Quick enough." She grabbed the back of his wheelchair. Then we're getting out of here. Together. As they joined the stream of wounded humanity flowing toward the exits, Declan felt something he hadn't experienced since the explosion took his legs, the sensation of moving forward instead of simply surviving. Above them, London burned, and below, in the tunnels that would become their refuge, a love story was about to begin. But first, they had to survive the night. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, dark as a grave's mouth, and Freya's grip on his chair tightened as the ceiling began to crack. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, dark as a grave's mouth, and Freya's grip on his chair tightened as the ceiling began to crack. Dust cascaded like deadly snow, and somewhere behind them, the east wing of St. Bartholomew's collapsed with a sound like the world breaking. "Keep moving," Freya whispered, though her voice carried the tremor of someone who'd seen too much death. The underground station is just ahead. They weren't alone in their desperate flight. A river of humanity flowed around them. Nurses supporting wounded soldiers, doctors carrying medical supplies, patients hobbling on crutches or being carried on stretchers. The tunnel echoed with groans, whispered prayers, and the shuffle of feet on concrete worn smooth by countless footsteps. Declan's arms burned as he propelled his wheelchair forward, but he refused to let Freya bear his weight. Pride was one of the few things the war hadn't taken from him, and he guarded it like a starving man guards his last crust of bread. "There," she said, pointing to a wider chamber ahead where the tunnel split into multiple directions. "Platform 9. It's deeper than the others, safer." The platform had been transformed into a makeshift city. Families huddled together on threadbare blankets. Children played quietly in the spaces between sleeping bodies, and the elderly sat with their backs against the tiled walls, eyes closed but ears alert for the next wave of bombers. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, carbolic soap, and something else, the metallic taste of fear. Freya found them a spot near the platform's edge, away from the main crowd. She spread her coat on the ground and helped Declan transfer from his wheelchair to the makeshift bed. The movement sent fire through his phantom limbs, but he bit back the cry. "You don't have to stay," he said, arranging himself against the wall. "You must have somewhere else to go." "Do I?" She sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something floral and fading, like roses pressed between the pages of a book. "My flat took a direct hit last week. My job at the Royal Opera House no longer exists, seeing as the Royal Opera House no longer exists. You're about the most interesting conversation I've had in months." Conversation with a cripple. How delightfully entertaining. Her hand shot out and grasped his wrist. Not gently. Don't what? Don't do that. Don't make yourself smaller because the world tried to break you." Her eyes flashed with something fierce. "You think I don't know what it's like? 3 months ago, I had a fiancé, a family, career. Now I have a violin and whatever clothes I can scavenge. We're all broken here, Declan. The question is what we do with the pieces." He stared at her, this woman who spoke his name like she'd known it all her life. "How do you know my name? I make it my business to know the names of all the soldiers who come through the ward." Declan Mercer, 42nd Infantry, lost both legs below the knee to a landmine outside Calais. 2 weeks in surgery, another month in recovery. Mother lives in Yorkshire and writes you letters you don't answer. Father died in the last war. She paused. "You talk in your sleep. Christ, he's not listening tonight." She pulled her violin case onto her lap. "But the people here are. They need something beautiful to hold on to." "You're going to play? Here. Music doesn't stop for bombs, Declan. It's the one thing that reminds us we're still human." As if to prove her point, a child began to cry somewhere in the darkness. The sound was quickly hushed, but the tension in the air remained thick as smoke. People shifted restlessly, waiting for the next wave of attacks, wondering if morning would find them alive or buried beneath tons of concrete and steel. Freya lifted her violin to her chin. "Any requests from the audience?" "Something quiet," called a voice from the darkness. "My boy's trying to sleep." "Something hopeful," added another. "If you've got any hope left in that fiddle." She began to play, and the music that emerged was neither wholly quiet nor entirely hopeful. It was something else, a melody that acknowledged the darkness while insisting on the possibility of dawn. You could hear in it the sound of wind through wheat fields, the laughter of children in summer gardens, the promises lovers made when the world was young and whole. Declan watched her face as she played, saw how she closed her eyes and let the music flow through her like water through a riverbed. Her body swayed with the melody, and for a moment, he could almost imagine her on a proper stage, in a proper concert hall, playing for an audience that hadn't forgotten how to dream. "You're staring," she murmured without opening her eyes. "Still playing. You're worth staring at." That earned him a small smile. "Careful, soldier. I might start thinking you're flirting with me." "Would that be so terrible?" "Depends on your intentions." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze while her fingers continued their dance across the strings. "I've had enough of men who make promises they can't keep." "What kind of promises?" "The kind that involve futures that don't exist anymore." The music shifted, becoming more complex, more urgent. "My fiancé promised me a house in the countryside. Children. A garden full of roses. He promised me we'd grow old together, that he'd teach our sons to play cricket and our daughters to play piano." What happened to him? Direct hit on his fire station. They never found enough of him to bury. The words hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the platform had grown quiet, people settling into whatever sleep they could manage. But Declan felt more awake than he had in months, as if Freya's music had awakened something inside him that he'd thought dead and buried. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. I've learned that sorry doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't rebuild the bombed buildings or regrow the severed limbs." She lowered her violin. "But music? Music can make the pain bearable. Music can make us remember why we fight." "Is that why you play for the wounded?" "I play for the wounded because the wounded understand that beauty is more precious when it's fragile, that love is more valuable when it's temporary." She looked at him directly. "That dancing is more meaningful when you have to reinvent what it means to dance." Above them, the bombers had passed, but the night was far from over. In the distance, anti-aircraft guns still thundered, and the smell of smoke continued to drift. Through the tunnels, Freya reached for her violin case, but before she could put the instrument away, Declan caught her hand. "Play something else," he said. "Something for dancing. I thought you didn't dance anymore. Maybe it's time to learn." She smiled then, and began to play a waltz, and in the candlelit underground chamber, something impossible began to happen. She smiled then, and began to play a waltz, and in the candlelit underground chamber, something impossible began to happen. Declan lifted his arms, and Freya set down her violin to take his hands. There, on the platform of the underground station, surrounded by sleeping refugees and the distant thunder of war, they began to dance. Not the way people danced in ballrooms or wedding halls, but the way broken things learn to be beautiful again. She swayed with the rhythm still echoing in her mind, her hands guiding his movements as he turned his wheelchair in slow, graceful circles. His shoulders moved with the phantom melody, and for the first time since the explosion, he felt the music in his bones instead of the pain. "You're a natural," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of the all-clear. Sirens beginning to sound. "I had good teachers. Before the war, I mean. My mother insisted on proper dancing lessons." He spun his chair in a tight circle, making her laugh. "She said no son of hers would embarrass the family name at the village socials." "And did you?" "Embarrass the family name. Only when I stepped on my partner's feet." He paused, the weight of his words settling between them. "I suppose that's not a problem anymore. Different problems. Same solutions." She took his hands again, pulling him into another turn. Dancing was never about feet, Declan. It was about connection, about moving together through space and time, finding harmony in the chaos. You could almost believe it, watching them there in the amber light of the emergency lanterns. Around them, London burned, but in their small circle of movement and music, something eternal was being born. Other people had begun to stir, watching with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred ceremonies. The all-clear sirens grew louder, and gradually, the platform began to empty. Families gathered their belongings. Nurses helped patients back to whatever remained of the hospital, and the underground slowly returned to its daytime purpose. But Freya and Declan remained, neither willing to break the spell that had been cast. "I should check on the other patients," she said, though she made no move to leave. "They'll manage without you for a few more minutes." "Will they?" She studied his face in the flickering light. "Will you?" Before he could answer, footsteps echoed down the tunnel. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a uniform that had seen better days, his face bearing the kind of exhaustion that came from too many nights without sleep. Freya? The man's voice carried a mixture of relief and something else. Something that made Declan's chest tighten with unexpected jealousy. August. Freya's hands dropped from Declan's, and she turned toward the newcomer. My God, I thought. You were dead. August Harmon stepped into the light, and Declan saw what he was up against. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of classic good looks that belonged on recruitment posters. More importantly, he had both his legs and the easy confidence of a man who'd never learned to doubt his place in the world. Nearly was. August's smile was warm, familiar. Direct hit on the command post. Spent 3 days trapped under rubble. Before they dug me out. He looked at Declan, taking in the wheelchair, the hospital gown, the obvious intimacy of the moment he'd interrupted. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were occupied. August, this is Declan Mercer. Declan, this is August Harmon. Freya's voice was carefully neutral, but Declan caught the tremor underneath. Augustus was my fiancé. The words hit Declan like shrapnel. The man who was supposed to be dead, who'd left Freya free to love again, stood before them whole and breathing and very much alive. The cosmic joke of it was almost too bitter to bear. August's eyebrows rose. Freya, darling, what are you talking about? The engagement still stands, doesn't it? I know I've been missing, but you've been missing for 4 months, August. 4 months without a word, without a letter, without any sign that you were alive. Freya's voice grew stronger, more sure. I grieve for you. I buried the future we'd planned together. I learned to live without you. But I'm here now. August moved closer, ignoring Declan completely. We can rebuild. Start fresh. The house in Kent might be gone, but we can find another. We can still have everything we dreamed of. Can we? Freya looked between the two men, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. Can we pretend the last 4 months never happened? Can we pretend I'm the same woman who said yes to your proposal? Declan felt like an intruder in his own life. This was the moment in the story where the hero was supposed to step aside, to let the lovers reunite, to sacrifice his own happiness for the greater good. But looking at Freya's face, he saw something August had missed, the way she'd changed, the steel that had grown in her spine, the woman who'd learned to dance with broken things. I should go, Declan said, reaching for his wheels. No. Freya's hand shot out, covering his. You should stay? This concerns you too. Does it? August's voice carried the first hint of ice. I'm afraid I don't understand what this cripple has to do with my fiancé. The word hung in the air like a curse. Declan had heard it before, from doctors and nurses and well-meaning relatives, but never delivered with such casual cruelty. Never in front of someone who mattered. His name is Declan, Freya said, her voice quiet but deadly. And he's twice the man you are. Freya, you're overwrought. The bombing, the stress, it's understandable that you'd form attachments to other patients. But surely you can see this as just wartime madness. When things return to normal. Normal? Freya laughed, but there was no humor in it. August, nothing will ever be normal again. The world we knew is gone. The people we were are gone. You can't simply waltz back into my life and expect everything to be the same. But I love you. Do you? Or do you love the memory of who I used to be? She stood, her violin case in her hands like a shield. Because the woman you loved wouldn't have spent her nights playing music for dying soldiers. She wouldn't have learned to find beauty in broken things. She wouldn't have fallen in love with someone the old world would consider damaged goods. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither man was sure they wanted to cross. August's face went pale, while Declan felt something leap in his chest. Hope, terror, and desperate love all tangled together. You don't mean that, August said. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. August looked at Declan with undisguised hatred. You've poisoned her against me. Filled her head with romantic nonsense about noble suffering and wounded heroes. I've done nothing but exist, Declan replied quietly. If that's enough to steal her affection, perhaps it was never truly yours to begin with. The challenge was clear, and for a moment, violence crackled in the air between them. But August was an officer and a gentleman, and gentlemen didn't brawl with cripples in underground stations. Instead, He turned back to Freya with the kind of smile that had once made her heart race. Come home with me, darling. Let me remind you who you really are. Freya looked at both men, the one who represented her past and the one who'd become her present. In the distance, the first bombs of the morning raid began to fall, and the platform started to shake. Her answer would determine not just their fate, but the fate of everyone in the tunnels below, because August Harmon had secrets of his own, secrets that would make the Nazi bombers above seem like a gentle spring rain. Her answer would determine not just their fate, but the fate of everyone in the tunnels below, because August Harmon had secrets of his own, secrets that would make the Nazi bombers above seem like a gentle spring rain. I choose, Freya began. But her words were swallowed by the shriek of incoming shells. The platform shuddered, and chunks of concrete began raining from the ceiling. This wasn't the usual nighttime raid. This was something else, something more precise, more targeted. Everyone, down, August shouted, his officers' training taking over. But as people scrambled for cover, Declan noticed something that made his blood freeze. August wasn't looking up at the ceiling like everyone else. He was looking at his watch, and he was smiling. The bombs fell in a pattern too precise to be random. Platform 7 took a direct hit, then Platform 5. They were working their way systematically through the underground system, and somehow, August knew exactly when and where each explosion would occur. We need to move, Declan said, grabbing Freya's arm. This isn't random bombing. Someone's giving them coordinates. Don't be ridiculous, August said, but his voice carried the forced calm of a man caught in a lie. The Germans are just getting better at their targeting, that's all. Another explosion, closer this time. Platform 6 erupted in a shower of sparks and screaming metal. Through the chaos, Declan saw August slip something small and metallic into his pocket. A radio transmitter. You son of a bitch, Declan breathed. You're feeding them information. I don't know what you're talking about. But August's hand instinctively moved to his pocket, confirming Declan's suspicion. The bombing patterns. The way you knew exactly when to take cover. You're not just alive, August, you're working for them. Freya stared at her former fiancé with dawning horror. That's impossible. August would never, wouldn't I? August's mask finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Do you know what 4 months of German captivity does to a man, Freya? What they can make you believe. What they can make you do. They turned you. Declan's voice was flat with understanding. They broke you and turned you into their instrument. They offered me a choice. Work for them, or watch them level every building in London, starting with the ones you love most. August's smile was no longer charming. It was the grin of a man who'd sold his soul and convinced himself it was a bargain. I chose the practical option. You chose to betray your own people. I chose to save the woman I love. August's composure cracked. They promised me that if I provided intelligence on the underground shelters, they'd spare the areas where you were hiding. Every coordinate I gave them was to protect you, Freya. Every bomb I guided was to keep you safe. By murdering innocent people? Freya's voice broke. By targeting the wounded, the children, the elderly? How many have died because of your coordinates? August, acceptable losses in service of a greater good. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Around them, the platform continued to shake as the bombers worked their way through August's carefully provided map. Families huddled in terror, children cried, and the wounded who'd sought sanctuary found themselves in the bullseye of a trap. There's another wave coming, August said, checking his watch again. Platform 9 is next. You have perhaps 3 minutes to evacuate. Why are you telling us this? Declan demanded. Because I still love her. August looked at Freya with something that might have been genuine emotion. And because I need her to choose me willingly. The Germans have promised us safe passage to Switzerland. A new life, away from all this destruction. But only if she comes with me. And if she doesn't, then Platform 9 becomes another casualty of war. August's hand moved to his pocket, where the radio transmitter waited. The choice is yours, darling. Come with me, and these people live. Stay with your crippled hero, and watch them all burn. You could almost taste the evil in the air, thick as smoke and twice as poisonous. This was the moment that would define them all, not just as individuals, but as human beings. Would love triumph over blackmail? Would courage overcome cowardice? Freya looked at the terrified faces around her, then at Declan, then at the man who'd once promised to love and protect her. "You're not the August I fell in love with," she said quietly. "That man is dead. Whatever the Germans did to you, they killed him and left this thing wearing his face. I'm trying to save you. By damning yourself? By making me complicit in mass murder." She shook her head. "I'd rather die with my soul intact than live with blood on my hands." "Then you've chosen." August pulled out the transmitter, his finger hovering over the button. "And you've chosen poorly." But Declan had been moving during their conversation, using the chaos to position himself between August and the families huddled against the far wall. Now he launched himself from his wheelchair, tackling August around the waist and sending them both crashing to the platform floor. They fought like animals in the rubble-strewn darkness. August had the advantage of legs, but Declan had the desperation of a man fighting for something greater than his own life. He had the strength that comes from learning to live with loss, the fierce determination of someone who'd already sacrificed everything and had nothing left to lose. "The transmitter," Freya shouted, diving for the device that had skittered across the platform. August broke free from Declan's grip and lunged for the radio, but Freya was faster. She snatched it up and, without hesitation, smashed it against the concrete wall. Sparks flew, and the small device crumpled into useless metal and wire. "No!" August screamed, scrambling toward the wreckage. "You don't understand. Without the coordinates, they'll bomb randomly. The casualties will be 10 times worse. Then we'll face them honestly," Declan said, pulling himself back into his wheelchair. "As ourselves, not as traitors." Above them, the bombers continued their approach. But now they flew blind. The systematic destruction of the underground had become a random terror bombing, horrible but survivable. People began to move with purpose instead of panic, helping each other toward deeper shelters, toward safety. "You've doomed us all," August said, staring at the broken transmitter. "No," Freya replied, taking Declan's hand. "We've set ourselves free." But their victory was short-lived. The platform shook again, and this time, the ceiling began to crack in earnest. Not from bombing, but from structural damage caused by the earlier explosions. The underground station was collapsing, and they were trapped in the deepest part of the tunnel system. "The support beams are failing," August said, his voice hollow with despair. "We have maybe minutes before the whole section comes down." In the distance, they could hear rescue teams working, but they were too far away. The tunnel was filling with dust and debris, and the air was growing thick and hard to breathe. Around them, people prayed, held each other, and waited for the end. But as the ceiling began its final collapse, Freya raised her violin one last time, and the music that emerged would either be their requiem or their salvation. She played the opening notes of Beethoven's Ode to Joy, but transformed it into something new, a song that pierced through concrete and steel, through despair and terror, through the very foundations of the earth above them. The melody soared upward like a prayer made audible, and something miraculous began to happen. The rescue teams above heard it. "There," came a voice from the rubble, distant but growing closer. "Someone's playing music. They're alive down there." Freya's music became a beacon in the darkness, guiding the rescuers toward their trapped location. But more than that, it became something for the survivors to hold on to as the world crumbled around them. Children stopped crying. Adults stopped panicking. Even August, slumped against the wall in the ruins of his betrayal, found himself listening with something approaching. "Peace. How is she doing that?" whispered an elderly woman, clutching her husband's hand. "How is she making it sound like hope?" "Because she's learned the secret," Declan said, his voice carrying across the platform despite the chaos. "Music isn't about perfect instruments or pristine concert halls. It's about broken people choosing to create beauty anyway." The ceiling groaned ominously, and chunks of concrete began falling like deadly rain. But Freya played on, her fingers dancing across the strings with desperate precision. You could almost see the music rising through the cracks, threading its way upward, calling to every rescue worker within a mile radius. "Keep playing," Declan urged her. "Whatever happens, don't stop playing." She nodded, sweat streaming down her face as she poured everything, all her love, all her loss, all her stubborn refusal to surrender, into the violin. The melody wove around them like a protective spell, and somehow, impossibly, the ceiling held above them. The rescue operation intensified. Drills began biting through concrete. Voices shouted coordinates. Heavy machinery rumbled to life. The music had not only guided them to the survivors, it had galvanized them into action with the urgency of people racing to save something irreplaceable. "We're going to make it," Declan said, reaching for Freya's free hand as she continued to play. "We're going to make it through this. Together?" she asked, never missing a note. "If you'll have me. Broken legs, broken dreams, and all. Especially because of the broken parts." She smiled, her bow dancing across the strings. "Those are the parts that make the music beautiful." August watched them from his corner, seeing something he'd never understood when Freya had been his. The way she looked at Declan wasn't the polite affection of a well-bred young woman accepting a suitable proposal. It was the fierce, wild love of someone who'd found her other half in the most unlikely place imaginable. "I really have lost you, haven't I?" he said quietly. "You lost yourself first," Freya replied without stopping her playing. "I just finally noticed." The first rescue worker broke through the ceiling 20 minutes later, followed by a cascade of others. They rappelled down ropes and set up emergency lighting, transforming the tomb-like platform into a scene of organized salvation. One by one, the survivors were lifted to safety, children first, then the elderly, then the wounded. When it came time for Freya and Declan to be evacuated, she insisted they go together. Two rescue workers carefully lifted Declan in his wheelchair, while another helped Freya gather her precious violin. As they rose through the makeshift opening, leaving the darkness behind, Freya played one final melody, not Beethoven this time, but something entirely her WWII was a song of gratitude, of love found in impossible circumstances, of hope rising from the ashes of despair. It was a song that said broken things could be made beautiful, that love could flourish in the darkest places, that music would always triumph over silence. They emerged into the pre-dawn light of a London morning, where the smoke still rose from burning buildings, but the bombs had finally stopped falling. The rescue workers had set up a triage area in the street, and medical personnel moved between the survivors with quiet efficiency. "What about him?" one of the workers asked, gesturing toward August, who was being brought up in restraints. "He's a traitor," Declan said simply. "Turn him over to military intelligence. They'll know what to do with him." August looked at them one last time as he was led away. "I really did love you," he said to Freya. "In my own way, I did." "I know," she replied. "But love without honor is just obsession, and obsession always destroys what it claims to protect." 6 months later, Declan and Freya were married in a small ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral, which had miraculously survived the Blitz. She wore a dress made from parachute silk, and he wore his dress uniform, medals gleaming despite everything he'd lost. When the vicar asked if anyone objected to the union, the only sound was the distant music of reconstruction, hammers and saws, and the voices of people determined to rebuild their world. Their first dance as husband and wife took place right there in the cathedral, with Freya playing violin while Declan spun his wheelchair in graceful circles around her. The small congregation, mostly other patients from St. Bartholomew's and survivors from that night in the underground, washed with tears in their eyes as two broken people proved that love could indeed conquer all. They made their home in a small flat overlooking the Thames, where Freya gave violin lessons to neighborhood children and Declan worked as a counselor for other wounded veterans. In the evenings, they would sit by their window and watch the river flow past, carrying away the debris of war and bringing in the promise of peace. And sometimes, when the air raid sirens were tested or thunder rolled across the London sky, Freya would take out her violin and play. Not from fear this time, but from joy, the kind of joy that comes from surviving the unthinkable and choosing to dance anyway. Years later, their children would ask them how they fell in love, and they would always give the same answer. "We learned that the most beautiful music comes from broken instruments, and the strongest love grows in the darkest places. Sometimes, you have to lose everything to find what really matters." In their garden grew roses, wild, imperfect, magnificent roses, that bloomed defiantly through every season, no matter how harsh the weather. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, you could swear you heard the faint sound of a waltz drifting through their windows, played by someone who had learned that dancing was never about having perfect legs, that it was about having a perfect heart. If this tale of love conquering even the darkest nights has stirred something in your soul, pray share your thoughts below. And should you find yourself moved to spread word of such stories to others, your humble narrator would be most grateful indeed. Tell us, dear friends, from what corner of this wide world are you watching today?